Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. So many things have happened yesterday to the point this is likely going to be a very packed episode. Let me walk you through this the way someone in my line of work would calmly, methodically, and grounded in reality. First and foremost, I want to begin with President Volodymyr Zelensky because yesterday he addressed the Ukrainian nation, and I want to highlight a specific portion of his statement. What he's essentially revealing, perhaps unintentionally, is that the United States is now applying significant pressure on Ukraine, and this isn't speculation. It's a fact supported by multiple sources, as you'll see. I also want to talk about Vladimir Putin because he too responded to the so-called 28-point peace plan. And let me tell you this plainly. The contrast between the Russian and Ukrainian approaches could not be more dramatic. Then, of course, we have the Europeans. How could they possibly stay out of this? Predictably, they don't like Trump's proposal. To be honest, I'm not sure anyone likes the proposal, but the ones complaining the loudest, as usual, are the Europeans. That's why they're scrambling to draft their own alternative. My friends, we have a lot to go through. And on top of all of this, Russian forces are once again advancing across the front line. So without further delay, let's go straight to Kyivska Pravda, the self-proclaimed beacon of democracy, and look at one key segment of Zelensky's speech. Listen carefully. Zelensky on U.S. pressure, Ukraine may lose either its dignity or a key partner. He says, "This is one of the hardest moments in our history. The pressure on Ukraine is as intense as anything we have faced. Ukraine may be confronted with a very difficult choice. Either the loss of its dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. Either a complex 28-point plan or an extremely harsh window, the harshest. And further risks, a life without freedom, without dignity, without justice, in which we are expected to trust the country that has attacked us twice already. An answer will be expected from us." And this statement is significant for two reasons. First, he's openly admitting the United States is applying heavy pressure. Second, what he says reveals a profound misunderstanding of the actual dynamics at play, and more importantly, of what the post-conflict reality will require. Let me be direct here. He talks about trust, but trust has nothing to do with this stage of the conflict. That trust evaporated long ago, 2014 with Minsk II, 2021 and onward. Nobody serious is building policy based on trust right now, and certainly not Russia. In the short term, trust won't matter. And yes, over time, trust could be rebuilt, but that's long-term work, not today's priority. This isn't complicated. Look at the end of World War II. Did the Germans trust the Soviets? Did anyone expect them to? Of course not. When you lose a war, you lose, you adjust, you rebuild, and if you're wise, you adapt. You don't demand to be treated as an equal partner by the side that defeated you. That's not how reality works. And yet here we are listening to arguments that sound completely divorced from any sense of strategic realism. These are assessments that should have been made before launching a war. Can we win? What's our manpower? What's theirs? What's our industrial base? What's theirs? What's our ammunition production? What's theirs? Unfortunately, none of those calculations were grounded in the real world. The entire Western Bloc moved forward under a flawed assumption, one I've seen repeated for years, that Russia is just a gas station with nukes. That misguided talking point has now collided head-on with reality. Western sanctions failed, Western military support failed to turn the tide, and the narrative is collapsing. Now, let's talk deadlines. Reportedly, Trump has given Zelensky until November 27th, next Thursday, to respond. Reuters confirms Washington is threatening to cut intelligence sharing and weapons supplies if Kyiv refuses to engage seriously. For years, I've said the same thing. Intelligence, real actionable, high-grade intelligence, has been Ukraine's single most valuable resource from the West. Without it, most Western weapons on Ukrainian soil become essentially blind and ineffective. Trump knows this. That's why he's using it as leverage. Now let's turn to Moscow. Yesterday, President Vladimir Putin addressed Russia's Security Council, and what he said was unmistakably clear. Russia has the means to achieve all objectives through military action alone if necessary. Translated into practical terms, simple. Russia will not accept any portion of the 28-point plan that contradicts its strategic interests. Full stop. Moscow is no longer playing the game where Washington hands out terms and Russia is expected to comply. That era ended on the 24th of February 2022. Now for the Europeans. The Wall Street Journal reports that EU leaders are drafting their own fairer peace proposal. But even if they manage to produce something coherent, which would be an achievement in itself, how exactly do they plan to communicate it to Moscow? They've severed almost every meaningful channel of communication. The only EU leaders with any voice in Moscow are Viktor Orban and perhaps Robert Fico. The rest, they carry no weight. Are they going to send Macron to Moscow to negotiate, to be taken seriously? It borders on absurdity. Meanwhile, Zelensky says he's coordinating joint steps with NATO's Mark Rutte. Let's be honest, NATO's boss is not Rutte. NATO follows the United States. And the United States under Trump is issuing direct instructions. Let me be perfectly clear. Mark Rutte is not going to Washington to tell Donald Trump what to do. That is not happening. All of this leads us to the battlefield. Deep State and other analysts report new Russian advances in Pokrovsk, in Donetsk Oblast, in parts of Zaporizhia, and near several other settlements. I'm not showing you this because I want to dissect the tactical picture. I want to highlight the timing. These advances explain the sudden diplomatic pressure from Washington. Trump does not want to be president during a Ukrainian frontline collapse. And right now, he's being shown sanitized, overly optimistic reports. Even Putin pointed it out. Ukrainian officials claimed there were 60 Russians in Kupiansk at a moment when Russia effectively controlled the city. A similar thing happened in Pokrovsk days ago. Ukrainian sources reporting absurdly precise numbers like 314 Russians. And it's not analysis. It's narrative maintenance. Add to this the massive corruption scandal in Ukraine, something I believe heavily influenced Trump's timing, and the picture becomes crystal clear. The political and military tracks are converging. Today, the president held an operational meeting with the permanent members of Russia's Security Council, basically the most important advisory institution in the Federation. As you can see, the key figures of Russia were their political leadership, military, and security chiefs. And Putin delivered some very carefully chosen words. Putin said Trump's peace plan to resolve the situation in Ukraine was discussed before the Alaska meeting, and during those preliminary conversations, the U.S. side asked us to show flexibility. For our part, we are ready to show whatever flexibility is being offered to us. Notice how what Putin is saying is ultimately exactly what Peskov has been saying. We had a framework with the Americans, we had an agreement in Alaska, and even before Alaska, some things were already discussed. It was the American side that backed away, the American side that hesitated. The Russians didn't step back for a second. Now, the American side, Trump is once again putting forward a plan based on the Alaska agreements and branding it the Trump plan. But it's not a Trump plan. It's the points treated in Alaska. Let that be clear. That's why Peskov and Zakharova warned no new plan has been officially discussed with us. What we have until now is Alaska. We have thoroughly informed all our friends and Global South partners about these matters. I want to emphasize that every one of our partners supported these possible agreements. However, after Alaska, we observed a pause from the United States. After the talks in Anchorage, the U.S. side dragged its feet. Trump didn't know what to do. Now I sanction you. Now Russia's very bad. Now Putin is very bad. Now Putin doesn't want to negotiate. After Alaska, we saw a delay from the orange orangutan, and we know it's because Ukraine rejected Trump's proposed peace plan. I think that's precisely why the new version was published, essentially a modernized 28-point plan. Notice how Putin talks about that peace plan in the third person, as if they're learning about it through the media, yet the plan clearly carries over what was discussed in Alaska. Russia has this text. They received it through the normal communication channels with the U.S. administration. They simply got it, checked that it resembles what was agreed in Alaska, and that's it, nothing more. In a way, we already suspected that something like this had happened. You give the Russians a peace plan similar to Alaska, and they aren't going to say no if it's basically the same thing. Because the side that delayed, the side that couldn't find its path, that hesitated, that wouldn't answer, that threatened that side was the United States. Putin says it's because Ukraine resisted, because Ukraine and the European Union didn't want to accept what Putin and Trump talked about. Well, I think Trump tried to push forward, use the situation to slap more sanctions on Russia, use the no peace period to attack Russia even more. Anchorage was in August, on August 5. Nearly 4 months have passed. Trump had time to maneuver. and a lot of time to think. So what happened? Obviously, Trump is seen because someone told him, since he doesn't see much himself, how much the United States is spending. He was told about the strategic defeat Ukraine, NATO, and the U.S. are suffering in country 404. He was told they can't do much against Russia anymore, economically, diplomatically, or even propagandistically. He was also told his approval ratings are in the gutter, that nobody wants him, neither Democrats nor Republicans, neither the establishment nor even the Israelis, if you want to go that far. Nobody wants him. So all those factors, which weren't as intense in August, have now led to this Trump defeated and with his tail between his legs is once again pushing desperately for a peace plan similar to Alaska. Everything has a reason. Nothing happens just because, look, Trump was sipping coffee with the Eurodogs. Trump was hugging Zelensky. Trump was talking about striking Moscow with tomahawks. Trump was pressuring Brazil, India, and Latin America to cut ties with Russia, and all of it failed. He tried to corner Russia by every possible means, and he failed. And now he needs weapons to attack Venezuela. Now he needs to shift focus to aggressing the Caribbean country. And on top of that, the U.S. is spending insanely on Ukraine. That's why the sudden urgency, look at the desperation that seized Trump. But 3 days ago, he was saying, we should let Russia and Ukraine fight longer. Remember, those statements were just a week ago. Let them fight longer. We'll talk about negotiating later. It's not time yet. That's what he said a week ago. So why the rush now? Why the anxiety? Have you run out of weapons storage, out of bombs, out of missiles? You gave everything to Ukraine, and now you're panicking. Late and badly done. Late and badly done. I don't want Russians to keep dying. I don't want the Ukraine war to continue. But I also don't want a war in Venezuela to start. A word to the wise is enough, right? The war in Ukraine is a catastrophe. It's lasted far too long. What the Kyiv regime, NATO, and the U.S. have done there is bloody and shameful. It must end now. But hopefully ending one war doesn't mean starting another. We've said this before. American politicians are scumbags. They're always calculating which country they'll attack next when they finish attacking the previous one. That's how the U.S. works. One thug goes in, another thug comes out. It's always the same calculation. Very bad, worse than bad. So yes, the Ukraine war must end now, but we don't want a Venezuela war to begin. Putin said the 28-point plan could serve as the basis for a final peace agreement, but it hasn't been discussed with Russia in detail. I can imagine why, so the Europeans and Ukrainians don't bark, the usual thing. It's basically a U.S. 28-point plan that they've been forced to swallow based on Anchorage. They probably removed a comma here, added a dot there. That's it. You'll ask me, Miguel, do you like the plan or not? I think the Russians are thinking strategically. They know Ukraine and NATO's warmongers will find it very hard to accept even this plan because it amounts to Ukraine's total collapse. Let's be honest, that plan does not reach Odessa. It does not fully liberate Dnipro or Kharkov. Historically, in justice for Russia, all of Novorossiya should become Russian territory, and of course that isn't covered, and I don't like that. There are things missing, but logically, Putin has parameters and data we don't have. The Russian government has a whole blend of facts and indicators the public doesn't know. With that, they make the best decision. And on that level, I trust Russia's leadership. Some of you will say, Miguel, you love Putin at night and in the morning. At night, I love him, and in the morning, too. But I trust Russian leadership, and I know they think strategically. I even think this negotiation process could be used to split the Western camp, because the reality is NATO has little left to offer in Ukraine. They're losing everywhere, badly. Putin himself said it. They don't have many options left. Meanwhile, the Russians, regardless of negotiations, haven't stopped firing, haven't stopped advancing, haven't stopped attacking. They negotiate and shoot at the same time. So I trust Russia's leadership, its calculations, and its armed forces. The reason is simple. The U.S. administration still hasn't managed to get Ukraine's consent. Ukraine opposes the Anchorage plan. Here's the thing. Putin is being condescending and giving the Ukraine a wink. He doesn't say it like I do. He doesn't say Trump is back to Anchorage because he was defeated and has no alternative. Instead, he says the U.S. paused everything because Ukraine is bad, because Ukraine refused, because Europe is warmongering. I understand why Putin frames it that way, even if it isn't true. In his position, I'd do the same. But it's not true. We've watched this day by day. Trump wanted to keep escalating. He said it not once, but many times. Even during this no peace period, the Americans imposed more sanctions, pressured Europe, pushed Europe to seize Russian assets, demanded Europe pay more, tried to split Russia from its allies. I get why Putin plays polite, but both Putin and we know Trump tried every way to corner Russia and failed. Now he comes running in a rush because he's out of options. We'll see what happens. Putin also said he still remembers how everything changed after Trump went to Windsor Palace with little Charles III, got a banquet, felt flattered, and got smeared with British stink. We know what happened. Still, I get Putin's calm. We're all more hot-blooded than Putin. He's patient. Thank God he is. If Putin were more aggressive after what happened in the Caribbean, that Russian oil tanker forced to turn back because a U.S. military ship blocked it from reaching Venezuela, someone else might have blasted that U.S. ship. But time is on our side. Time in the multipolar world runs in our favor. We shouldn't rush into giving the U.S. the wars it desperately needs. Putin says Ukraine and its European allies are still deluding themselves into thinking they can inflict a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. He suggests it's not incompetence as much as a lack of objective information about the real frontline situation. I think they do know, and they just don't care. Some are clueless, some are cynical, but they all know Ukraine is getting smashed. The engine is dead, the tires are flat, and they keep driving anyway, even if Ukraine breaks apart. Putin gave a recent example, Kupiansk. 2 weeks ago, Kiev publicly claimed there were no more than 60 Russian soldiers left there, and that in days the city would be cleared. But around November 4, Kupiansk was almost entirely under Russian control already. Ukraine said there were only a few Russians when the city had basically fallen. Putin uses this to show that Kiev and Europe either don't have real information or can't evaluate it objectively. I think Kiev lies and hides reality from the press, but they know what's happening. Kiev still hasn't even announced the loss of Bakhmut. Their rhetoric is always the same. If a city falls, they say it didn't. If a pocket closes and thousands die, they claim they ordered an evacuation weeks earlier, a lie. Zelensky himself joked with the general staff there are 60 Russians in Kupiansk and we're killing them. He didn't believe it. He was lying for image. That's why I say they know, but they lie. If Kiev refuses to discuss Trump's proposals, then what happened in Kupiansk will repeat across other key sectors of the front. Maybe not as fast as we want, but it's inevitable. The Ukrainian defense is collapsing. Russia is satisfied because it helps achieve the goals of the special military operation through armed force. But Russia is also willing to negotiate peace, provided every detail of the plan is thoroughly analyzed. I've said it before. When the enemy surrenders, you give them a bridge of silver and applause. Leave. But you must do it properly and secure every interest. After this, Ukraine is wrecked. The day after for Ukraine looks horrific. How do they repay loans? What will creditors demand? Where does the money come from? What happens to the Vivnia? What happens when families can't find their soldiers because they're dead? What about pensions? The day after is terrifying. The energy system is destroyed, and Russia could keep hitting it. Putin's exact lines in Russian say, Ukraine is against the plan. Ukraine and its European allies still dream of defeating Russia. This comes from lack of objective information about the real battlefield, and events like Kupiansk will inevitably repeat elsewhere. Russia is fine with that because it advances their objectives while still remaining open to peace talks if details are addressed seriously. To me, these declarations are coherent and consistent with Putin's line. Goals will be achieved by force or by dialogue. People get disappointed when Putin talks dialogue, but he always has. We all have Odessa and Kharkov in mind, but calm down. When there's a competent captain at the helm with full data, he'll decide the best course. Diego Maradona, a genuine anti-imperialist. He had huge personal problems, and we don't whitewash what he did privately, but politically and geopolitically, he was a giant. Zelensky was crying and warning that Ukraine faces a critical moment in its history. He even released a video saying Ukraine is under maximum pressure, facing a hard winter, risking the loss of key partners, etc. He talks like the defeated always do, and a defeated Nazi even more so. We'll see what happens. Trump wants to wash his hands of this because time's running out and Ukraine is disposable. RT compiled the information in detail. Whether you like him or not, RT has been massively important in breaking Western propaganda walls. BBC, Washington Post, New York Times, those are important for the bad side of history. RT, especially in English, open minds. After RT, you still need to go further, but its role has been decisive. After the 28-point plan leaked through Western media, reactions appeared. Putin said again, after Alaska, there was a U.S. pause because Ukraine rejected Trump's peace plan. A modernized 28-point version came out. Russia received it through normal channels. It could be a basis for final peace. It isn't being debated in detail because the U.S. still hasn't gotten Ukraine's consent. Ukraine and Europe still dream of defeating Russia. Kupiansk proved their delusions. If Kiev refuses talks, Kupiansk will repeat across the front. That benefits Russia's objectives. Russia is still open to peace, but details must be debated fully. Side note, Putin always takes his watch off before working at the table. Western disinformers say he hides expensive watches. Nonsense. He takes it off to work. People who don't know what work is can't understand that. Meanwhile, Trump went on Fox News and said he'll impose harsher sanctions on Russia, especially to choke Russian oil sales. Then he added Russia doesn't want the conflict to continue and wants understanding. So one day, Putin speaks politely about Trump, and the next day, Trump threatens Russia again. He's unbearable, arrogant, petty, disgusting. The U.S. path looks grim. I don't wish harm on the American people. Many viewers are there, but U.S. policy has to change. Its habit of stepping on the whole world has to end. In recent hours, the U.S., not Israel, the U.S. has ramped up military pressure with recon aircraft, spy planes, radar planes near Venezuela, Russia, Iran, Africa, North Korea, China, all at once. Transponders on, drones with transponders off in Iran against Hezbollah in Yemen, all at once. Imagine Russia doing daily recon over Norway, the Baltics, Germany, Alaska. Would that be tolerated? Of course not. Yet they call everyone else the bad guys. That is, the U.S. has bases all over the world, but the bad ones are China, the Chinese dictatorship, Chinese militarism. Nobody talks about U.S. militarism, a defense budget bigger than the next 15 powers combined. Spanish TV lectures about China while serving the most predatory empire in history. The hypocrisy is obscene. And Spain, the Attorney General got sentenced to 2 years of disqualification. I won't get into evidence. The key point is courts are split by judges placed by PSOE and PP, left judges and right judges appointed by political parties. So the expected ruling is whatever favors the ideological majority. That's it. Same facts, same evidence, different outcomes depending on who appointed the judges. That's not a true rule of law. If the judiciary isn't independent, there's no democracy. Yet Spain lectures China, Russia, Venezuela. Ridiculous. TV pundits wasted weeks arguing evidence, testimony, law without telling the public the basic truth. If the chamber majority answers to PP, it convicts. If it answers to PSOE, it acquits. End of story. That's the democracy we have. Judges higher up respond to the bell of the politician who placed them. So all those mainstream analyses are worthless. They can't say it because they're part of the system. That's why when a solid, powerful, intelligent leader dedicated to his people appears like Vladimir Putin, it gives you joy. And it will keep giving us joy to NATO's misery. Zelensky, NATO, and Trump can go to hell. They'll keep eating Putin's dust. Also understand, Russians aren't like us culturally. They have different rhythms, strategies. They absorb a hit, stay calm, then strike when you think they won't. That's why you don't beat them. It's just how they are. The same judicial corruption happened with Lula too. Judges must be fully independent. If top judges are placed by politicians, everything else rots. Corruption, lawfare, all of it, they become political tools in robes. Now the U.S. has issued a NOTAM warning for all Venezuelan airspace and parts of the Caribbean, claiming risk due to worsening security and rising military activity inside and around Venezuela. They forgot to say they're the ones causing the danger. The warning runs until the 19th of February 2026, meaning they plan to terrorize the region for months. And watch this. Some fake pro-Venezuela right-wing traitors will celebrate if Venezuela is attacked. They'll cheer bombings and Venezuelan blood. They claim to fight for democracy and freedom, yet they'll rejoice at deaths. Meanwhile, real Venezuelans will rejoice only if invading blood spills on Venezuelan beaches. That's the difference. Truth is seen in who celebrates what. Trump says he plans to talk soon with Nicolas Maduro, and what he'll say is, hand over power or there will be killings. But Maduro can't just walk away and leave Chavistas to be massacred. The right-wing opposition is Nazi-fascist. They'd slaughter commanders, generals, journalists, the entire Socialist Party. That's what Trump is really proposing, and it won't happen. Then there's the UK independent MP Jeremy Corbyn sending support to Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, and Caribbean peoples under U.S. pressure. It's striking. A Brit is more decent and more in solidarity than Spanish right-wingers. Sometimes we have more allies in the Anglosphere than the Hispanosphere, because the problem isn't nationality, it's whether you're a decent human being or a bastard. Corbyn even says the Malvinas are Argentine. Of course they are. Even many Brits know it. They just exploit what they stole, like they do with Essequibo from Venezuela. The real cancer in Latin America and Spain has been internal right-wing traitors who kneel to empire. And some leaders like Milei saying half for one, half for the other about the Malvinas. That's insanity. A president cannot recognize another country's sovereignty over your own territory. If you concede even half, you lose it all. Better to recognize zero. Saying otherwise is treason. Corbyn's message in English basically says, these are dangerous times. The U.S. is, again, threatening Venezuela and building bases around the Caribbean and Latin America. Solidarity must be with Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, and all Caribbean peoples. People in the U.S. are also starting to resist. We must be bold and hopeful. A Brit talking about real change for the poorest on earth might sound contradictory, but again, it's about people. Be a right-winger if you want, but don't hand your country to empire. Look at Noboa, look at Milei. The right-wing saviors bring nothing but lies. The core of it is racism against their own people, surrender to foreign power, fascism against what they themselves represent. They hate their own nations. Maria Corina Machado doesn't love Venezuela. She hates it. She'd rather be an American governor ruling a humiliated Venezuela. Same with Milei, spending more time in the U.S. than Argentina. They see themselves as colonial governors for the Gringo Empire. If it weren't the U.S., it would be someone else. The mindset is the same. Today, you can't be an entregusta anymore. Before, media dominance let them get away with it. Now there's more awareness. We want what's best for our peoples, not for gringo corporations or BlackRock. We're proud of who we are. We won't be told what to be by gringos or their local servants, so we'll keep fighting to the end. A strong embrace. Don't lose your compass. Don't let them deceive you. Many people struggle to accept truth after decades of lies. The mind defends itself. So when you finally give them the red pill, they resist it, even if deep down they know it's true. It's psychological self-defense. The battle's hard, but we move forward. That's it for today. The rest continues tomorrow.